I'm Igor Kayfetz, and this is The List Building Lifestyle, the podcast for anyone who wants to build a wildly profitable email list working from home. If you'd like to make six figures, travel the world, and help people improve their lives in the process, this podcast is for you. I also invite you to claim a free copy of my best-selling book, The List Building Lifestyle: Confessions of an Email Millionaire, at igorsbook.com. Get the free book plus $3,000 bonus package that includes my best capture page templates, email swipe files, and traffic blueprints. Visit www.igorsbook.com for details. And now, it's time to claim your list building lifestyle. Welcome back to the List Building Lifestyle. I'm your host, Igor Kayfetz. And today we're going to talk about storytelling, specifically storytelling with email, because I've got Bill Mueller, and I hope I pronounced that last name right, who is the creator and founder of the Story Sales Machine, one of the few programs I'd say out there right now who's actually showing you, teaching you, and giving you templates and examples on how you can use storytelling in email. So, Bill, welcome to Building Lifestyle.
Igor, good to see you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great to host you. It's been a long time in the making. I kind of dropped the ball there with communication. I think I disappeared for a couple of years, but now we're back, and I'm excited because one of the most common questions I get from my advanced students is, how can we use storytelling in email? How can we tell better stories? How can we become better storytellers? So one thing I've picked up from your program is, and your program is actually one of the few programs I actually went on and bought. And that's really helpful because since I started using storytelling, I've been relying on templates a whole lot. And it's just been a lifesaver for me because I was never a natural. So before we get going and get into the nitty-gritty, can you share with us how did the idea come to be, or why did you decide to put together this program, and how did you even get into the whole selling with stories, industry?
Yeah, well, I had been writing for clients for many years, and even partnered with a friend of mine with a how-to product that we combined into a business for years. And so just over the years and writing sales pages and email campaigns, a lot of the traditional copywriting techniques worked, I found, and they were great, and I got great results. But there were a couple occasions where I would fold in a story from one of my clients, and just because it was too good of a story not to tell. And the results we got, especially from that first client I had who was selling a product for teachers, we got so many replies, and we got so many sales and engagement, just completely changed everything. And I thought it was just kind of a one-off, a fluke. But whenever I had an opportunity to try it again, I noticed that it just seemed to work really well. And it makes sense. Everybody's kind of hardwired for stories. So at that point, a couple of years ago, I decided to teach that because the results were pretty undeniable. And, it's no secret that stories sell. But that's kind of how it started. I'm old enough to remember direct response marketing back in the 70s, and storytelling was not so much of a thing. It was just kind of, back then they thought you had to keep things short, and you can just see that anytime I tell a story, people just get drawn in and they don't feel like they're being sold. So that kind of fit into with my mindset, and that was another reason decided to teach that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I guess the question in my mind right now is storytelling in email any different from storytelling in general?
Yes, a little bit. That's actually a great question because people think that, yes, there's, storytelling for screenwriting and movies and novels and short stories and essays and blog posts. And the requirements or the best practices are definitely a little different. Like, for instance, people think there's a misconception that I need to take my email reader through the whole hero's journey. And that would actually be a bad thing to do, because the purpose of an email is different than, say, a novel. So if you're writing a novel or a screenplay for a movie, you do want to take the reader through that whole hero's journey, the whole hero's journey. But if you do that in an email, think about what it's like to finish a novel. You finish that last page and you feel resolved, you feel complete. But what are we trying to do in an email most commonly? We're trying to get people to take an action. So we want some tension to remain there. We don't want everything resolved. So, and you don't have time in an email to tell a 2,000 word story either. You could. I've done that before, and it's worked if you really know what you're doing. But for the most part, you've got to really shorten it. And there's all other misconceptions we can get into, but generally with emails, it's a little bit different than other forms of media you're using.
Yeah, and I would love to get into more misconceptions, because I think the more we can flush those out, the easier it might be for somebody who's picking this up and to even give it a shot. Because I know a lot of people steer away from storytelling just because they feel it's, you kind of have to be a novel writer. You kind of have to put in those twists and, create complicated characters and crap like that, right? They really don't see like email storytelling as a more simpler beast. They kind of scares them.
Yeah, exactly. You almost have to redefine your image of what a story is. For instance, even if you just threw in a couple lines of dialogue back and forth, that's you don't want just to tell a story. But if you just use some storytelling techniques to draw the reader in, that puts you ahead of the game right there. So one misconception I hear from people all the time is they feel like they don't have any stories to tell. And that's like the first biggest misconception, like that their life is pretty ordinary. What they don't realize is those ordinary moments are actually the best stories, because you may have pulled a baby out of a burning building and you could tell that story. And yes, it's an amazing story, but people can't relate to that. But they can certainly relate to being at the grocery store and the cashier gave you too much change and you walked into the parking lot and realized that, and then you had a decision whether to go back and return the change or not. That's a story that everybody can relate to. And you want to meet your reader where they are. So people think they need these amazing near-death experiences, and those stories have a place. But for the most part, it's those small, ordinary stories that happen to you every day that really ring the bell with readers, I think.
I completely agree. And it's funny you mentioned the near-death experience stories, because it seems like almost every guru I've ever seen on stage starts their speech with, "It was a cloudy Saturday morning. I was in a car, but the car was upside down and on fire, and a paramedic was shouting out my name and trying to pull me out of a burning car." And you're like at a marketing seminar expecting a speech about lead generation. It's like, it's like every time, it's a bigger than life epic. Either I died or I went to prison and came out, reformed, or I lost everything and cried under the table like a little bitch. Like, there's always something so dramatic and crazy that you go like, wow, compared to all of that, my life's really boring. So obviously I can't tell story, but I don't agree with that at all. I agree with you when you say that you must tell those more mundane, simple, sometimes even appearing to be boring stories, but the most important thing, they're relatable. And I think that's brilliant. And the example with the cashier giving you too much change and you having to go back, which of course we can complicate a little bit and say, but she also was rude to me, or he was rude to me. Now I have to make the decision to go back. Oh, and by the way, it's also raining, so I have to go back in the rain. So you can twist it, but the point that you're making is so solid. It's, first off, you don't have to tell complicated novel-like near-death experience or how I went to prison or whatever stories. Those are rare, and we don't wish that on anybody. But there's another thing that I learned over the years. You also don't have to tell stories that happen to you. Like, you don't have to tell only the things that actually happen in your life. You can easily go, and that's what I've done over the years, and collect people's stories. I've got a swipe file of stories that have nothing to do with me, but they're so good. They make such good points and teach great lessons that I was like, yeah, I'm totally stealing that. And I'll give credit when I tell it, but I'm like, wow, that's a great story. I can easily repurpose it in my emails.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I have a swipe file of hundreds and hundreds of stories in I just look for them wherever I can, whether it's Google News or you run across them. There's different newsletters you can subscribe to that tell amazing stories that you haven't heard anywhere. And you're right. The onus is not on you to tell the story. There's great stories everywhere, and give credit always where you found the story. And even the stories you think you've heard before, there's always even just one detail you can pull out and relate to your own experience or the experience of your audience and make it come alive for them.
Yeah, I agree. And one of my most favorite places to go and get great stories is Reddit. I don't really go on Reddit all that like a lot. I'm not a big fan of that website. But whenever I'm doing any kind of research for anything, this is a trick I learned from my friend John Bijakovic. I hope I'm not butchering that, but he's also a copywriter just like you. He's got a great blog. And, he once told me that he goes on Reddit to find stories. I tried it out, and I was doing some research for a project in the make money space where I do a lot of my work. And there's I just went on and I started looking for stories that included the words like boss, toxic, job. And man, some of the stories, the way people quit their jobs or the way bosses treated them. And they're what I really felt made those stories great and relatable and interesting was the detail, the authenticity, that the details that were provided actually gave the stories. Yeah, there was no names, there was no locations, but you can almost picture it like a movie scene when you read it. It could be just as little as 2 paragraphs, which is easily copy and pastable into an email. But the emotional impact of that priming for the next line in your email is insane.
Yeah, Reddit is great. Another place I use is Quora, Quora. It's a question and answer site. And if you sign up for notifications, you can get emails, and people ask the strangest, most bizarre questions, but there's always people with stories and even some random forms. I actually sent an email to my list I ran across, I wanted to illustrate how powerful some of these forums are with the capability of finding ordinary stories. And I came across, it was literally vacuum reviews of vacuum cleaners. And you would think, that's the most boring thing ever. This woman wrote a short 3-paragraph story that was so moving. Her kid would not pick up the toys in his bedroom. So she went up there in anger, and the kid would move, and she's vacuuming around the kid. And she was so angry, she vacuumed up by mistake like one of his Lego toys, and it broke the vacuum. And she had to return the vacuum. And you see, you have all these issues. And let's say you sell parenting advice or something. It would have been a great story. And so this is just on one random site of vacuum cleaners. They're just everywhere you look.
Yeah, you just have to look, right? It's kind of like triggering that part of our brain that start noticing things, like when you think of a person and they ring, or when you're buying a new car and all of a sudden you see that car everywhere. So in the same way, once you kind of set the intention in your mind to look for stories, these stories almost jump at you. Not to mention, for me, I got a bit lucky because I've kind of been surrounded all my life by people who tell great stories. My dad has always been a great storyteller. My best friend in Israel was always telling a bunch of stories, which not all of them were relatable, especially to my market, people mostly in the Western Hemisphere, because he's from Ukraine originally. So a lot of it was relatable to the Eastern European mindset. But still, I've always been surrounded by people who just tell lots of stories. And it's something that just I found to be captivating. Like, there's nothing more exciting to me than sitting down over coffee and just listening to a great life story. And then what I've also started doing is sometimes I wouldn't take the whole story that I would find. I would just take a bit out of that story and just use that. Like, you almost don't always have to tell the entire story from scratch, right? It doesn't have part of it that can be repurposed in an email. Just by saying something like, and this reminds me of that story I heard about, and then you kind of tell it in a summarized way.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing I do, Igor. Every day, at the end of every day, I have a spreadsheet, or I'll take a printed journal, whatever, and I'll think back on my day, and I'll think, what's the one moment in my life that I could tell a story about today? And whether it's that moment at the cashier, because those moments come and go. If you don't train yourself to recognize them on the fly, they'll pass you by. I mean, the only reason people don't realize there's a half a dozen things that happen to them every day that they could use as stories is because their radar is not attuned, like you said, with the blue car phenomenon. And so at the end of the day, I just take 5 minutes and I go, okay, what 1, 2, 3 stories happened today, just moments. And I just write 1 or 2 lines about it. You don't tell the whole story, because if you just write a line or two, you'll remember the rest of it. And
Yeah, yeah.
and then after a while, if you do that on a regular basis, you end up with hundreds of story ideas of moments that make for a good story.
Yeah, and again, it's just a few techniques. Another technique that I've always found to be fascinating is a technique that I've seen Ben Settle use a whole lot, and he uses fables. The most memorable one that he used was about the scorpion and the frog or something, where it jumps on the frog's back to take it over the lake and stings the frog in the back. And the frog's like, "What are you doing, idiot? You're killing us both." And he's like, "I can't help it. I'm a scorpion, like don't blame me. That's my nature." So I mean, that was a story right there that gets the point across so quickly. Fables, stories about animals, stories about creatures that don't exist. I mean, pretty much everything can be transferred into that format. I was actually just this past weekend. I was under the weather. My whole family got sick, unfortunately, and so we couldn't go anywhere. So we spent the weekend watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which is, to admit, to this day I haven't seen. Like, I haven't actually sat down and watched all 3 movies ever. I've only heard about them, and I have lots of friends who did, but I was never a fan. So having watched the movies, I then connected to a buddy of mine who's a big fan. He's actually got the sword that they rebuilt. He has like a replica of the sword, and so he told me that the author was a soldier in World War I. And turns out that the Nazgul, these big black dragons, and that flew around, that were scaring everybody, those were the first German airplanes, because Germany had superiority in the air. So they were like, so he got inspired by the events of the war to create a story about dragons and orcs and the good versus evil, and the big eye that was overseeing everything, and this ring that had control over people. So I mean, almost everything can be transferred into that format, and I find it to be fascinating if you just allow your brain to see things that way, I guess. Because in my opinion, it's not that storytelling is very difficult to do. It's just almost no one's trained to do it. Although everybody, literally every human being on earth, is trained to consume stories and basically loves them.
Yeah. I'll give you another that's a really good point, and that people dismiss because it seems like it's common knowledge, but it's so powerful. I'll give you a nice little shortcut that I use all the time. I also keep my eye out, not just for stories, but for terrific images. So I sent an email to my list a week or 2 ago. It's an image that's been sitting on my hard drive forever. I don't know if you're aware of it. St. Martin Island in the Caribbean has an airport runway that's right next to a beach where people can hang out on. And these planes land. If you go to Google Images and put in St. Martin, Maarten, you'll see all these images of people sitting on the beach, and the planes, you could literally throw a football and hit the bottom of these planes. I don't know how it's allowed in post 9/11 world for that kind of security, but it's the images there that photographers have gone to take. It's just so striking. I stuck that image into an email, and since I teach storytelling, I was teaching the technique of using a story to tell, using an image to tell a story. But what I said was, you could segue that into any sort of airplane story you had, or you sat next to somebody fascinating on an airplane, it's so easy to segue from an image that the image, there's a story always implied in image. You've heard the saying, every picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, if you pick the right picture, you can usually draw a story out and relate it to your own story. And that's another way to draw people in, or even just get story ideas.
Yeah. And I think that's because the brain thinks in images. Like it's easier for the brain to process an image than it is to process words. Now, this is why the speed readers tend to, I think they kind of read by taking snapshots of the words rather than pronouncing them in their head. But yeah, like an image can easily inspire a story. And even if you think about it, a lot of therapy is done through playing little mental movies with patients in their mind, as well as hypnosis that's done by pictures and not by stating words. So imagery is extremely powerful and super inspirational, and I completely agree with that. Now, I know that your background is in writing. Because you were a freelance writer at one point, you've been writing copy for clients for a long time. But my guess is a lot of people who kind of get into email marketing are not. They don't have that sort of background, and they always stumble with writer's block and a bunch of other misconceptions about writing that hold them back. Perhaps you could share maybe a tip or two for the newbie, the writing newbie, so to speak, that would help them ease the burden of trying to write a great story or trying to write in general.
Yeah, well, I would tell them, stop trying to write, just talk. Writing is just talking on paper. And that brings us to another great myth, which is people feel like they need to be a writer to write emails. No, you just need to be conversational and have something to say. And one of the best email writers I know is a gentleman who sells an e-commerce product, and he just speaks from the heart. And he literally just dictates his emails into a little dictaphone that he has, and then he just has an editor or his VA clean it up, and then he does a final look through. But really, writing is just talking on paper. Nobody should be intimidated by it. Email's a very forgiving format. You're not writing a book. It's even less formal than a blog post. You don't even have to write complete sentences here and there. You just need to have authenticity, sincerity, a good product to sell, whatever it is you're writing about, and just write conversationally.
Yeah, I think it's a great tip. And there's a great software called Otter at otter.ai that transcribes what you're saying in real time, whether from your mobile device or your computer. So you don't even have to hire a VA to transcribe your stuff. Now it's done through, AI. And my mentor, my copywriting mentor, once told me that he wished people wrote emails the same way they write their Facebook posts, because it seems like on Facebook people don't feel the need to filter themselves at all. They don't find it to be formal in any way. They just kind of get on Facebook and start typing. So he said if more people wrote emails like that, we'd see a lot more great email copy than that. Now, Unfortunately, we're running out of time. We have to stick to the format, but I know you have a lot more to share. And not to mention, you've got these amazing templates that people can use to tell stories, as well as ready-to-go stories that are already formatted and just copy-pastable and ready to go for different purposes, products, and services. So where can we find out more about what you do and about the Story Sales Machine program that you've got?
Yeah, it's that exact name, storysalesmachine.com. And what I teach in that program is how to tell story-based emails in an easy and conversational way. Like you said, I have if people choose, they can get a packet of ready-to-go stories they can copy and paste. I also have templates where you can customize and put your own story in there and details of whatever it is you sell. And that's where they can find that, storysalesmachine.com.
All right, guys. So you heard the man. It's www.storysalesmachine.com. I highly recommend you go and grab it. I actually own it. I use the stories in those templates. Sometimes if I'm lazy or short on time, I'll literally copy and paste. One of my favorite stories out of that swipe file, I'll give you a sneak peek, is the one about the Nissan GTR. It's about a guy who goes on to like a car park or whatever, or a lot, and basically buys a really cheap, beat down Nissan. And somebody questions them as to why they've done it, and it turns out to be like a collectible car that no one noticed, and basically that is worth a lot of money. and it's a story about how some gems are just out there and no one notices. And I think it's a great point. It's just an amazing, like when I read that story in the swipe file, I was like, I almost like sat back in my chair and was taken aback at the quality and the caliber of the story and just how universally applicable it is to whatever that I wanted to promote. So guys, this is the kind of quality that Bill has in that program. I sincerely recommend you go and check it out. Go to storysalesmachine.com right now, or if you're driving, do it when you're not driving, or if you're in the shower, just get out of the shower immediately and go to storysalesmachine.com. Okay, so that's about it for today. Bill, thank you so much for taking the time to rap with me about email storytelling and story selling. I can't wait for our members and listeners to go and grab your program. And until next time we chat, have a good one.
Thanks, Igor.
Thank you for listening to The List Building Lifestyle. Get access to the previous episodes, transcript of today's show, as well as other exclusive content at listbuildinglifestyleshow.com. Also remember to claim your free copy of my best-selling book at www.igorsbook.com. It explains how I made millions with list building starting from scratch. Plus, I'll give you $3,000 worth of free bonuses, including my best landing page templates, email swipe files, and traffic blueprints. Go to www.igorsbook.com now to claim your free package.